You know that EPFL is taking very seriously all the mental health and health in general, but also, I mean, the sense of community, and we want to have EPFL inclusive. We want to learn from you how to solve not equations, but conflicts. Because maybe we are good at equations, but we are less at solving conflicts and dealing with human interactions. It's more complicated than interaction between atoms for me as a physicist. So maybe a few words about Laurie. So Laurie Keashly, I mean, got a PhD, and she's a professor of communication and distinguished service professor at Wayne State University in Detroit. For over 30 years, she has been working on the quality of work relationships, particularly the amelioration of uncivil, hostile, and bullying behaviors. And this is especially what we want to hear also from you, maybe also during the Q&A. And most recently, she has focused her attention on problematic behaviors in academic environments and work with universities on these issues. That's, again, for me, a very important matter. We all know that in labs, especially in university, there are very special interactions, and this is what we would to know more today. Thank you very much, and the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Nicholas. And thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very touched and I feel very honored by this. And I hope that some of the things that I will share today, I can throw into our shared pool of meaning, and we can have conversations about this. I also see this as the beginning of a conversation. I do want to acknowledge the lands on which the university at which I work exists. It is the sovereign lands of the Three Fires Confederacy, the Ojibwe, the Odawa, the Potawatomi, and the Wyandot nations. This is our way of honoring our colleagues and our neighbors in this event. It's about recognition, and that's a theme you're going to see run through this whole presentation. It's about recognition, acknowledging peoples and what they do. So let me give you an overall frame for the session. As I was putting this together, I like to have some kind of big picture idea in my head. But what came to me was the poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's work, an American writer and poet. And there was a poem that he wrote, a very brief poem he wrote about children, and in essence was talking about the mercurial nature of kids. You know, they do really great things, they do not so great things. I am paraphrasing. So this is the section of the poem I'm taking out for you, just shows you the frame that I'm coming at with this presentation. When academia is good, it is very good indeed. But when it is bad, it is horrid. And so that's what we're going to look at the dark side of it, the horrid side, but that focus is always on knowing what we need to do and how to think about these things, because there's also a lot of good in academia. I mean, a lot of us are here because it's exciting and energizing and knowledge building, and you get to meet with a variety of different people. So we know there's a lot of good. We also have to be very direct and honest with ourselves to accept the data as it shows up to us. So let me give you an overview of what I want to do. I want to talk briefly about behavior and meaning, and within that context, talking about the value and features of academic structure and culture. Talk broadly about community and connections, but in that I'm going to talk about some of the horrid stuff, particularly bullying, mobbing, incivility, and the various forms of harassment. I'm just going to touch on those, give you some background on that, what we know, how it shows up here at EPFL based on the reports and surveys that you've done. And then I want to focus the latter part talking about how do we nurture the good while recognizing we're also going to need to manage the bad. So buckle up, we're going for a ride. So at various times, academia has been characterized by its own members and by people from outside as a culture of cruelty. One headline asked, "Are academics mean and nasty?" So there's already sort of a question that's raised both by members internal to the institution, but outside about how you all function, and that this is, are you just mean? You're just mean. I like this quote too, because I listen very carefully in my own institution, but also in other places about how people talk about things, because I think that reveals some of their expectations, some of their assumptions, some of their norms. So this came from Robert Sternberg, who's a very well-known developmental psychologist in the United States. He was president of the University of Wyoming. And when he was asked about life in the academy, he gave us this quote: "When you choose a career in academia, you need to be prepared not only for rough and tumble politics, but also for the verbal abuse that goes with it." Embedded in what he just said was, hey, it's the way we are. It's just normal. So basically get used to it. That's a set of assumptions, and we're challenging those assumptions today. And in fact, EPFL, as I've looked at the content on your websites, as I've looked at your reports, as I've looked at your Respect initiative, and this whole set of health days, the institution is challenging that embedded set of assumptions. Doesn't mean they're still not there, but they're challenging it. The other one is smart people are abrasive. I was told that by a dean one time when I was talking about a colleague's behavior and how we needed to manage it and have them be more constructive. And he said, well, smart people are abrasive. So he was giving that person a lot of latitude to behave in ways that in other contexts they would not be allowed to behave. So what do I mean by context? There's actually, we talk about 4 different contexts, relationship contexts. So you each know that you behave in somewhat different ways, and there's different expectations, for example, in certain friendships or in your romantic partnerships or in your work partnerships, right? So the same behavior takes on a different meaning depending on that relationship. With close friends, I can tease, I can do all of that, and they know it's teasing. With students, teasing, that's a whole other thing, because I'm the professor and me teasing. So I watch my behavior in those circumstances because I know the meaning is different. Specific activities, meetings versus a conversation over coffee. There are different kinds of norms and rules about that. The structural and normative contexts are the 2 that I'm really going to focus on today. Structure is basically how we are set up as an institution, not just the physical structure, but policies, procedures, reward systems, you name it. And then the normative context is more about what are the sets of assumptions, the expectations, many of which are rarely surface. They're implicit, and that's a particular challenge for it. So as I think about that, I spent some time on EPFL's website, and also Albertine and Nicholas were very helpful to me in providing me with some couple of documents that would help me understand, or as an outsider, get a better perspective. So in their mission and outlooks document, we see this about the EPFL's direction. That's a very powerful, focused, energizing statement. And look, in service of progress in society. That is amazing. What I was particularly struck by was this. They specifically say in this report, and here's the reference to the report, it's about our community, and then lists off all the members of the community. They're the heart of what we do, and it's dedicated and passionate individuals who make things happen. I was thrilled with that. Now, I also know there's things we put in writing and then how we manifest them. But as someone from outside reading that, I'm like, okay. At the very least, this institution understands that the work that is done, the ability to accomplish their mission, comes right down to the people that they have. And so caring for those people, taking care of those people becomes critical. Now, sometimes there's a gap then between knowing that and the doing, but we'll get to that. Let's just say a little bit about features of higher ed, what makes them interesting. And for me, as someone who's done a lot of research in workplace bullying in a lot of different industries, higher education, academia is a different beast. organizationally and structurally than just about every other industry. So we call it a complex mixed organization, right? You have what we call here the business side of the house. This is finance, this is personnel, this is HR, this is all of that side of the house. And then you have the academic side of the house where the education and the research is taking place. And they have different ways of operating. So you could consider the more administrative side or business side to be like a bureaucracy. And I'm not using that as a pejorative. Bureaucracy is a legit term for talking about a structure. And that collegial government's on the academic side. And we're going to take apart collegiality in just a bit. What that means is there are a variety of employee groups on campus. Lots of different employee groups on campus. And they often have very different functions, but those functions are really important. They're interdependent. So you have the long goal as articulated in the missions and strategic goals document of moving forward transformation and education and research. But there are also those more immediate goals that could conflict. So for example, as a faculty member, I may have what I consider a brilliant idea for something that would be a useful program for the students, and I really want us to fund that. And so I work with my leadership on that, and they come back and say, Loraleigh, that's too expensive for us, or we don't have the resources for that, or that kind of thing. So we feel like we're conflicting. We have different ways of thinking about how we're going to get there. So there's conflict. Nicholas mentioned that there's conflict. What I think is particularly powerful here is when you have a variety of employee groups like we do in the university or in the institution, there are different roles, so they have different expectations. And that influences the kind of culture that develops within those employee groups, and also what we call the rules of engagement. What's appropriate conduct, what's not appropriate conduct. So for example, with faculty, and I'll go through this a little bit, they're about dissent, analytic, critique. That's how we develop and refine our ideas. We have a culture of debate. So we take on things with ideas, and every time an idea shows up, we do not necessarily go, okay, that's fine, or that's not fine. We engage with it. It can be a little intense with us at times, right? For staff, the roles are more support roles. So the expectations are around cooperation. So the seeking of consensus and clarity. So you have faculty sort of being disparate and looking at all the different sides because it's a critique, and you have staff who need to kind of pull it together and say, okay, how do we go about making this happen? How do we go about supporting your research? How do we go about conducting the education in a way that meets our students' needs, but also the needs of a society and us as an institution? The administrators have oversight, institutional decision-making, so they're balancing multiple needs. So they have to walk in a variety of spaces. The students are in learner roles, but in the last few years, particularly, I don't know if it's true for you in Switzerland, but in the United States, it has become a much more focused consumer roles, which has kind of caused a little bit of a tidal wave for us in the institution. So they're being served by us. And sometimes the expectations are from a customer service model. I pay your salary, you're not doing your job. And what a student might think my job should be, making things easier for them in class perhaps, or in the lab, may not be what is appropriate pedagogically and in terms of scientific work. So, and then we have our external members, advisory boards, governmental agencies, donors. So you have these multiple actors, these multiple employee groups, and they have different sorts of rules of operating and conduct. So that creates an incredibly rich environment in institutions, rich for creativity, innovation, but also rich for conflict and difficult behaviors, and in some cases, abusive behaviors. It also is very hierarchical. And yet we have a philosophy of being egalitarian. Everybody can speak, everybody can, share their ideas. But there's that hierarchy of privilege reward and ranking can be pretty restrictive, depending on how people operationalize it. I mean, I worked in institutions for almost 40 years now, and I also have reached, quote, the rank of a full professor, which is supposed to be kind of one of the top characters. And I'm like, I'm still the same person. No, you should have listened to me when I was an associate prof. Why? All of a sudden, because I got promoted, now you're going to listen to me. So there, within the institutions, we function in a variety of different ways, but this is part of what restricts us. So it's a focus on degrees and position rather than the individuals. As much conflict as there is, as Nicholas noted, and as I was saying in this complex organization, we tend to actually try to avoid it, which can really make it even more problematic. How we assess performance, it tends to be quite subjective, particularly on the academic side of the house. You're judged by your peers. We do try to come up with policies and rubrics for this kind of thing, but there's a lot of influence. There is room and latitude for information and attitudes that are not directly connected to one's performance by the evaluators. And we permit, and the thing about hierarchy too is we permit what I call much broader behavioral latitude based on status. So if you have someone who the institution considers a star performer, be that on the business side of the house or the academic side of the house, brings in big grants, managed to navigate through a government, a bureaucracy, all of that other time, they're often given more room in their conduct than, say, you or I would be given. So if we behaved in a particular way, somebody might say, hey, oh, well, stop. That's not appropriate. What you said in that situation had this kind of impact. Sometimes with star performers, because the institution sees them as so critical to their success, they're allowed to, in essence, get away with it. So the other thing I think that's interesting is our notion of shared governance, which means that the faculty and the administration and management technically are partners in the institution. So they should be partners in decision making, that type of thing. And at various points in time, sometimes that's been firmly embraced, other times it has not. I bring that up here because it's faculty who have that partnership. A lot of the staff do not have that partnership with the upper level management. So that creates a different set of expectations sometimes and behavior on the part of faculty. Academic freedom and freedom of expression. Ooh, huge topic. I'm not going to be able to do it complete justice. Let me just say that it forms the basis for the kinds of things that faculty researchers and whatnot do. It forms the basis. We are free to pursue in our education and in our research of what topics that we choose, even if they're controversial, which is not typical in a lot of other industries, right? There is much more control over that. So we, on the academic side of the house, we have that freedom. And for people who aren't in that role or from outside, some of the things we say and some of the things we investigate, maybe you kind of go, oh, that's just bad. We are facing a number of challenges here in the United States, where the idea of academic freedom and freedom of expression is being challenged right now in institutions. Why do I mention that? Oops, sorry, guys. Why do I mention that? Because it defines what, on our side of the house, what we consider appropriate or inappropriate behavior. So me talking about a controversial idea, because I'm a faculty member, because I'm a researcher, I'm given more freedom to raise that and talk about it without fear of retaliation. That may not be the case for somebody outside that role. I don't know if you all have this, but we have tenure for some of our faculty, for some of our researchers. So that is seen to go hand in hand in the United States with academic freedom because it protects us from arbitrary firing. So we can continue to pursue controversial ideas. A lot of people in the institution don't have that. They don't have the long-term contract. They don't have it. So it can constrict what they're allowed to do, or what they're permitted to do, I should say, and what people who have tenure, which in the United States means unless you've done something absolutely egregious, they you cannot be fired. You cannot. There's other ways we do things with faculty. The challenge for that is things like, so if people are rewarded for what it is that they accomplish, what is there an incentive for them to cooperate, to work across a variety of different lines? And then also the notion of a golden handcuffs, which for us means that these are, I mean, I just said this is unlike anything you see in any other industry, that you're going to have, if you wish, and you behave, broadly speaking, without egregious conduct, you can have this for life, which in a job market that fluctuates, in an economy that goes up and down, that's pretty exciting. The other one that's very characteristic of the academic culture is this notion of autonomy. Again, that ties into academic freedom. It's bolstered by things like tenure that are, because faculty, researchers, academic staff are permitted and allowed to pursue whatever it is that the science suggests they should, and all of that. Um, Sometimes some folks perceive themselves as independent. I'm autonomous. You can't tell me what to do. I don't need to change my behavior because of what position I occupy. Um, that's not true. In fact, we're all interdependent. And in the original statement coming out of your mission and strategic outlook document, there's a recognition there that you aren't in this alone. So everybody here is interdependent. You're going to have some folks who are going to argue about that, but it's the fact of the matter is any person in the institution will only be able to do their job and fulfill their goals with the help of other people in the institution. Collegiality, you hear that a lot. What is it? Because I use the term collegial governance. What does it mean? Often we talk about it almost like congeniality, like they're a nice person. I can get along with them, right? But that's actually not what collegiality means. Collegiality actually means the collective sharing of power. So, how we work together to create, support the work, everybody's work, and the work of the institution, and so forth. And there's a certain constructiveness to that, right? But what I like about it, and it's going to help us leap into the next part, is it's all about, it centers relationship, it centers connection, it centers community. So I made the point that autonomy is not as it's described. Collegiality focuses, that's about this group. That's about you. That's about the members of this particular institution. So briefly, before I flip, I just want to say that these different kinds of values and norms that we see on the academic side of the house, and there are a corresponding set on the business side of the house. They have a particular set of characteristics, critique and challenge being big. And if I'm talking to a staff member who may not know me, but they know me as a faculty member, and they've come up with an idea, and I immediately move into my critique mode, like, well, they may not experience that as, oh, good, we're going to have some lively debate. They may really see that as an attack. So it shapes things, and I'm going to come back to that. Are we rough and tumble, cut and thrust, or is this a creative process? Probably both. And it's different than other work environments. So there's different sets of rules in the same work environment. And that has implications for what gets considered appropriate conduct and the responses to it. It's really important that we understand that. And I'm going to try to bring that home a little more. But more broadly, the kinds of behaviors and the conduct that people manifest has implications for the quality of the work environment, for the quality of life in this community. So in essence, it's all about community and connection. That's what this is all about. It's all relational. We don't do anything alone. The university's already acknowledged in their documents that the reason they can do what they do is because of all of you and all of you doing your jobs. And they need to support you in your jobs. And they actually have this lovely icon that focuses on campus and community. So I want to introduce this notion to you, which won't be a surprise to you, as if you've been hanging out with, faculty like me who do research on, and I'm a social scientist. We like to take things that you're very familiar with and give it a special name. Well, I'm going to do that here. We talk about my colleague Jane Dutton from the University of Michigan, which is just down the road, talks about two types of connections in organizations: the high quality connections, which are characterized by things like respectful engagement. And you do have a respect initiative. I'm going to come back to that. Task enabling, helping people do their jobs. We need each other to help us do what we're trying to accomplish. In a lab, you need all the members of your lab to help you, if you're the leader of that lab, do the work that needs to be done. Trust. It's trusting. These are the kinds of connections where you feel that. There's a playfulness to it. I'm not talking, people get the work done. They do it in ways that have a lightness to them. And particularly characteristic of them, these are the connections. These are the relationships that energize you, support you in tough times, buffer you when things are really wicked, and can actually move to protect you. And my bet is, as soon as I described that, somebody, at least one person, popped into your mind as being one of those high quality connections. And I wish that you had several of them. And I wish and I hope that several of them exist in this environment, because it's phenomenal. There's the other side, aptly called the corrosive connections, which is exactly what they do. They undermine, they demean, all the D's, diminish, devalue, you name it. And a play on words of Studs Terkel, violence to the spirit. And we have those connections too in the institution, in our community. We have those kinds of connections, and they're draining. So I want to keep focusing on the high quality, but I do need to talk about the corrosive connections. So let's talk about those things. We like to talk about a continuum of conduct: the good, the bad, and the ugly. So on the green side, you've got those high quality interactions. The respectful and disagreement can still be part of that, right? You can disagree and passionately discuss issues in ways that still supports and nurtures the relationship and the connection that you have with the other person. It's a safe place to explore those things. So disagreement is not bad. Dissent is not bad, right? There can be competition, but it can be friendly competition, right? It's how we make each other better with our ideas. And we do that a lot with our research and things like that. We're spurred on by other people's work and maybe challenged by it and want to question it, right? And on the business side of the house, competition may play out a little bit differently. And it's creative. These are creative kinds of things. Now, on the other side is the really bad stuff: the criminal, the violent, the dangerous, right? And it's the middle part that I'm going to talk about. So you have discrimination, harassment, which is, as I understand it, illegal in Switzerland. It's certainly illegal in the United States for what we refer to as protected class, different identities. If you are outside those identity groups, we do not have federal law regarding discrimination and harassment. This is the categories that we've referred to as bullying and mobbing. But as I understand it, and I hope I got this right, is bullying and mobbing is actually considered discrimination and harassment here in Switzerland. So there is legal statute on it. We do not have legal statute in the United States, for example, about bullying and mobbing. The only way we access it is if it's connected to somebody's protected identity. But other than that, and most bullying is actually outside that. So let's define it. I'm an academic. I'm going to define stuff for you. Incivility. This is the ambiguous kind of behavior. I like to focus on the fact that it displays a lack of regard for others. It's what you might consider or experience as rude behavior. So that shows up in lots of different ways. Then we get to the really ugly and egregious stuff. So bullying, and I'm going to pop up mobbing. So these are, I think of them as persistent forms of aggression. So we will have experiences with each other that can be a little bit rough. And I'm going to talk about a little bit about some of those. These two are different in that this is not just the occasional rubbing up against somebody or a difference of opinion. This is persistent, enduring sets of behaviors. It's patterned. There's a number of things involved with it, and the effects are dramatic. And I'm going to talk just briefly about those effects, but I have a sense that you have no surprise. I've seen the surveys that you have done, and I do understand that you have insight. I do want to flag, I've been doing work, like I said, in this area for 30 years. The last several years, I've started to focus here. Cyber harassment and bullying. Now, with the proliferation and the utilization of a variety of electronic means of communication, these kinds of behaviors have mushroomed in ways that are incredibly harmful and very difficult to manage, particularly if they come from outside the institution. So, for example, the public. And we have situations of faculty being doxxed because they tweeted something or they Facebook something or they put something out on Instagram, which they had assumed was going to a scholarly community, but we know pretty much with a lot of these platforms, somebody can screenshot and share it somewhere else to an audience who doesn't have the same set of rules. So this has become really, really ugly and it's scary, but we have some ideas about how to do that, how to deal with it. Just wanted to put up what I learned about how things are defined in Switzerland and in EPFL. So in the Culture of Respect Survey 2021, violence contains, it's interesting to me, violence contains these three broad types of behavior. And one of those is what we would consider incivility, rudeness towards and lack of respect. We have not typically in the United States associated that with the word violence. However, it is starting to show up as psychological violence, emotional violence, and so forth. Here you use the term psychological harassment. That description describes what I'm talking about when I talk about bullying and mobbing. So you have regulations, you have rules, you have. I'm excited for you. I am, because that's a way to hold an institution accountable too. I always like to mention this because it's an interesting experience being a person in a university who's known for doing work in bullying in the university, because everybody wants to talk to me about stuff. And sometimes the things I have to say to people is that isn't bullying and mobbing. It's difficult and it's challenging, but it's not that egregious stuff. So do you guys get along with everybody you meet? I mean, I would like to think I do, but I know that I don't always get along. And the ways I can manage that in a way that just like, well, okay, I can recognize that you're a human being and value that. And I don't have to spend time with you. I don't have to do. So just sometimes it's just the general daily sort of rub. High performance standards and corrective feedback. This is sometimes where I hear it, where an employee of the institution, be that a faculty member, staff member, student, whomever, has gone through some kind of feedback and they've been told that they're not doing something well or they didn't do something. And none of us honestly like to hear that. We like to know that we're doing a good job, right? But if it's constructive, fair, timely, specific feedback, that's appropriate. Now, there are ways to give feedback that are none of those, and I would say that those border on being hostile and abusive. Different styles of communication. Some people defer themselves. I'm very blunt, and others will do a lot more preparing the ground before they get to where they're going to go. And if those two styles are embodied in two people in a situation, it can be very difficult because they're talking differently. But to the extent they recognize it, then it's not a problem. They work with it. Conflicting opinions, I just told you that. I mean, if EPFL, in their statement, it says we're about knowledge and transformation and innovation and things like that. There's going to be conflict in that. But conflict can be really creative and exciting. And we've probably all had those experiences where we learned something new and thought about it in a different way. And also the legitimate expression of academic freedom. And particularly for our humanist and colleagues, if for us, the English departments, the languages, and so forth, we can do all sorts of interesting rhetorical devices and tools. So satire, hyperbole, conjecture, irony. We love to play with words. We love to play with images. But by their nature, they're not straightforward. So there's an interpretive component there, which opens up the door. What does it look like? These are the kinds of things we see. Isolation is a big one, excluding people from things. They didn't get that memo, or they're left off an email, inconsistent on it fairly frequently. Or when people enter a room, others turn away and walk away, or things like that. Emotional abuse is the one that people can more typically identify as problematic. Treating people poorly, calling them names, raising voices in anger and yelling at them. Those ones are a little bit easier to identify. The nice phrase of control and manipulation of information, holding things back, reframing it, lying about it. Controlling the environment, so abuse of working conditions. I know that sometimes there's been a strategy in our institution where if somebody is particularly outspoken and is known to challenge a lot of things, now all of a sudden they end up getting scheduled at 8 o'clock in the morning for their classes. Their office gets moved to, the far side of a building outside of there's interesting ways that people express that. What's very critical for academics is our reputation. And so one of the ways that we can be attacked and hurt is by being professionally discredited. And being told your role's not important. For staff, being told, if you're ever told by an academic, a faculty member, well, you're just staff. I mean, there's a statement right there that's about devaluation, and it's completely inappropriate. How big a problem is it? I did a review a number of years ago. It got published in 2021. Globally, we're talking about in a 12-month time frame, 25% of people within institutions, staff and faculty, will self-identify as having been bullied. And another 40% will identify that they have seen it or heard it happening. So that's like, you're talking about the majority of people in institutions know what we're talking about here. They've had this experience. We know that women, people who are members of racial and ethnic minorities or sexual minorities, disability will often tend to report higher levels of bullying. They're different. And that's some of the framing that actors will use is that they're different. They don't fit. They don't belong, right? And so bullying is used as a strategy to move people up. In our research, we found that different employee groups have different kinds of actors. So for faculty, the most frequent actor for them are their colleagues. And then it moves to admin and students. It goes senior to junior a lot, but it can be done the other way around. I've seen that done, and it can go peer to peer. For staff, it's usually the supervisor, but coworkers can be an issue. And in an institution, faculty and students can become problematic. For students, it's usually other students. But faculty are the next ones. And with gender identification, what we find is it's a lot of same-sex harassment. So women will do things to other women, men will do things to other men. This is your data that came from the Mental Health and Wellbeing Survey. So this was the report was 2023. The data was collected in 2022. Overall, you have a 23.5% response rate of those people indicating that they felt possibly and definitely bullied, right? So you're in the same ballpark globally as everybody else, but don't get comfortable with that. You have to think for yourself, is that what we want? Just because we're in the norm of academic institutions globally, is that going to be acceptable to us? And I suspect you're going to say no. But some people might say, well, we're even a little better. So everybody just take a breath. It sounds really good. You do see people, though, different members of your community reporting different rates of it. Your doctoral students, for example, and that was particularly highlighted in the report. People expressed a great deal of concern about that. Or people who are other than binary in their gender or sexual identity. We see admin and technical staff. I mean, you've got rates there, right? So it's real. It's there. People recognize it. They can see it. Also in your report, you did show that there were effects if somebody identified or was identified as being bullied or in the experience of bullying, they showed mental health and physical health effects. And also changes in job attitudes, their satisfaction with their job, their willingness to engage, their commitment to the institution. And institutions like ours rely, and your institution said this initially, they rely on you to manifest, to make what they want happen. So if you feel dissatisfied, pull away, withdraw, leave, work to just the minimum, that dramatically affects them. So then they will see things like people leave, climates form, the reputation becomes threatened for the institution, particularly for lawsuits. Education ultimately can. If you have people who have been mistreated systematically and they're in the classroom and they're working with students, they're not at their best, right? So it could affect the things that the institution cares a lot about. So why does it happen? We've already explained. So the structural parts of it. There's intra and interpersonal stuff here. Miscommunication, poorly managed conflict, poorly managed stress. That can be true in some circumstances. I know that, for example, I work a lot with communication, and even I still have to do a lot of work sometimes clarifying what I intended to say and how I intended to say it. So if that's where particular folks' behavior is coming from, then the action would be to do training for everybody, which EPFL actually does. Are there low perceived costs and risks for behavior? So I've already argued that if you have star performers or tenure, that can create a situation, an enabling situation where somebody says, well, but I mean a lot to the institution, or I'm a full professor, so I can do things that maybe you can't do. So are there low perceived costs and risks for behavior? Like what's the message coming from the institution? What's the message coming from leaders, whether that's a leader in a lab or in a department? What's the message coming from peers? Are there policies? You all have policies. Is there scarce resources? We are in the United States, the universities are under really tight resources, even some of the well-resourced ones right now. Part of that's a relationship with the broader government. Other parts are our enrollments have been dropping, and that's a basis for a lot of our funding. People perceived as different. So bullying is used as a strategy to move people out. You don't belong here. You're not welcome here. If somebody feels threatened to their status, they will sometimes start to engage in egregious behavior because they're going to go on attack. If people perceive that norms have been violated, and this kind of marries with the being different part, because people who are different than what the dominant crew was are often seen as operating by different rules, and they challenge things. Any new person coming into an organization, an institution, or any industry will often have questions like, oh, you guys do things like that. Why do you do things like that? So if somebody's perceived as breaking the rule, in factories, we used to call this breaking the line, then bullying is a way you bring them back into line. And then your environment, the overall environment. We're in a tight squeeze here in the United States and have been for some time. I hope that is not your case. There's a lot fewer people doing still the same amount of work, and we've got all sorts of stressors, and resources are tight, and the demands on people are increasing dramatically. So let's get rid of all that stuff, right? Now, how do we nurture? How do we bring out the light? How do we bring out the good? And you already have instances in your institution where you are doing this on an ongoing basis. I like to talk about institutional, so this systemic actions, because bullying and mobbing and a lot of these other hostile kinds of behaviors will not persist in an organization that does not tolerate it. The sexual harassment research for decades has documented that when organizations do not tolerate these behaviors, even people who are inclined to do them will not do them. So institutions, we got to check and see what we're doing as an institution. So policies and procedures, I'm going to do some specific examples. The department or group, so where we spend most of our time. So yes, I'm a member of Wayne State, but I'm a member of the Department of Communication. That actually is my primary identity. So what's happening there? How are we managing that? And what kinds of constructive ways are we developing? And then individually, it's about accountability. And you have at EPFL a quality culture initiative, which I took a quick peek at and I'm curious about and want to learn more about skill building. When we have people engaging in behaviors that are identified as problematic or experienced as problematic, then we want to help them be different about that. And so that might require coaching. But the key is you have to have a variety of things. You have to do a variety of different things. So I'm just checking my watch because I know we started late. Okay, I think I'm still okay. But Albertine and Nicholas, I'm going to go for probably another 10 minutes. Is that going to
That's
be
okay.
okay?
Yeah,
That's
that's okay.
okay. Okay. So the institutional level, I like to say this is where people have to start, and you have done that. You are doing that. So I got to tell you, I'm particularly impressed. So what is your climate and culture? What are your mission and core values? And I've learned with your mission and strategic outlook report that the institution is really focusing on surfacing their values and creating a vision that is inclusive and recognized. And that statement that I had at the beginning about you as a community and you're the heart of the transformation, that is part of what they're talking about. I like to highlight this part. Collect data for sure. And you've been doing that, and you've had 3 separate surveys in the last 3 years. That's important to do that. And it's important that it gets shared back to the members of the community and they discuss it with you and help you, if you're the one doing this, help you interpret what this means because they're the folks who are living this. They can tell you what the numbers mean. So surveys are really good. It's also good to supplement that with focus groups and more qualitative opportunities. Always remember to model what you're looking for. If you want to model respect, or if you want to model how to deal with a particularly difficult colleague, which by the way, I see you guys had a session as part of your health days. Yes. Model that. And in the process of doing this, the survey, the sharing with people, that's that process is important because throughout that you get to model the environment and the climate that you want. You're taking into consideration people's thoughts about it. You want their input from it. You actually take those and create actions, which I have seen documented on your website. So your website respect, and I love the trust point. I just think that's kind of amazing. But look, I looked at all of those resources and I'm like, whoa. And this has occurred within about a 4-year period. So when the institution turned their attention to this as something that they wanted to continue to develop and nurture, they invested in it and they've invested in it over time. You got to keep, you got to keep getting them to do it and you got to engage with it, right? Because the reality is, I talk about the institution, but the reality is what each of us do in this moment and over time we can actually shift the culture too, because there's more of us, for example, than there are of the senior leadership, right? So we can shift things. Policies, yes, absolutely important, but they're not enough. And I've seen institutions do this a number of times where they put a policy in place and they say, okay, we're done. And I'm like, oh no, you're not. You're not done, right? Policies are important because they are a public statement and a statement to everybody about what is desired here, what's the conduct here, what are the practices here. They can include frameworks for how we're going to handle problematic circumstances and mitigate it, and everybody's supposed to know about a policy. They're grounded and connected to what the institution says they want to do. And without it, if you don't have that kind of framework, then these incidents that occur are treated in isolation. And so the dots are never connected to see, wait a minute, we got a pattern happening in the institution, or we have a pattern happening in that lab, or we have a pattern happening in that department or in that college. And so that means you respond inconsistently, and different kinds of responses then communicate different sets of expectations. You do have policies, your LEX policies, the one on psychosocial risks and the one on whistleblowing, all of which came into fruition in the last 3 to 4 years. So again, I'm seeing all sorts of evidence on the part of the institution. Address the structural inequities, because we know that those are connected to people's experiences. They get frustrated, they get stressed by a lot of this stuff happening, and then often that will motivate actions that are aggressive and hostile from people who typically wouldn't do that. So our good old role state stressors, overload, which I imagine a lot of you are sitting in the audience going, I know about that, or the invisible work, all the work that even when you go through performance review, it's not categorized there, but it's the work, but you're doing it. So for example, for me as a faculty member, some of the invisible work is when I'm working with students who are in crisis, or who have a difficult emotional issue that's affecting their ability to do their work in the classroom, which is actually my main job there, but I need to be helping them do that. Or any ambiguity. Reward structure. What are your reward structures? How do people get acknowledged in your institution? How do they know that they're seen and they're heard and they're recognized? Sometimes institutions assume, well, we give them a pay bump, or, we give them a bigger office. But what about in those moments, in the in-between? Because as they said initially, the reason this institution is successful is because of you. Do you know how they feel about you? Do you know how your colleagues feel about you? Clarify procedures and indicators. So the subjective performance stuff needs to be clear about what's involved, how the assessment is done, what's considered appropriate information, and then mentoring and support. And then addressing outside pressures. That's something for the senior leadership to do. Educational programs, you all do this like amazing from what I have seen. People need to know you've got policies, because that's a big problem. We found that in our surveys that people were not aware that there was a policy, or they were not aware that there was a place they could go if there were problems and issues. And we have a variety of places, but most of our people didn't know. Well, how are we going to help if they don't know? Building those high quality connections. How do you foster and affirm exemplary behavior? And many of the times we do it in the micro ways, where we say to somebody, that was a great presentation, or I really appreciated your work on that committee. Those moment things that happen. And how do we respond when behaviors are unacceptable? There's the power of the peer. I do a lot of, in working with faculty, I think that's, if we want to manage a faculty's behavior, it's other faculty who are well situated to do that because they're peers. And they can manage that. They have the permission, the legitimacy to do it. So I have done training with faculty and also with staff about effective bystander intervention, and you actually have a brief video of a doctoral student talking about intervention. And then skill building, how to argue effectively, how to critique, how to manage conflict, how to set expectations. Because a lot of miscommunication that I see is because people assume they have the same set of expectations, and sometimes they don't. And if you don't recognize that, then the attributions are the other person's a problem. This is a difficult situation. Okay, checking my watch. Group and department responding. It's important to address this. Your environment there can become toxic, but it can also become an incredible place. And I'm in a department, and I've been in departments that are very constructive and positive. And that has a lot to do with the people in there and their commitments and their beliefs that this is the kind of environment they want. And so there's some approaches that are useful here, which is surfacing those implicit expectations. So there's what we call the department communication protocol, which I've given some examples in the slides. I'm going to flip through those, but you're going to have this again. The witness and bystander stuff, very powerful. And you can do things as a witness that will not put you at risk. So I do a lot of work with people, helping them understand the different things they can do. And then restorative interventions. We are working a lot with the concept of restorative justice, restorative practices, which recognize that when something happens in the community, not just the people immediately involved are affected, but so is the rest of the community. So the bystanders or witnesses, we know from our research, they are dramatically affected by what happens in a bullying and mobbing situation, for example. So restorative practices are about recognizing that there has been harm and working to not only mitigate the harm, but to repair the relationships if possible and reintegrate people into a unit. Now you're going to see me flip by a few slides. You're going to have these. I just want to make sure, get a chance to talk. So here's the communication protocol. Here's my pitch for why getting colleagues in, stepping in, because they're around more. We see things happening. This is true, staff, faculty, students. We see things, and how we respond shapes the norms and communicates the expectations here. So if I see a colleague yelling and screaming at somebody else and I don't do anything and I just turn and walk back into my office, that's communicating something. And I think what it's communicating is, well, whatever, I that's not my job. But there's ways you can do this that doesn't put you at risk. So the restorative practices, wanted to introduce you to some of this. Although I was scoping on your website and I saw a reference to restorative justice, which I was excited about, but it was tied to something called the Scala Center. And as I read about the center, I wasn't really clear how that connected, but that's there. Let me leave you or stop with this. You can see from talking about bullying and mobbing and bad things that damage gets done. And then we do damage, we try to manage that, but people are hurt. And it's very challenging to heal. And we don't often talk about healing in institutions either. So I'm a big fan of doing upfront work. And you can see that in your Respect initiative. I see that in some of the approaches. So if there are particular circumstances in which people tend to get tempers flare and things start to happen, alter those circumstances. So in meetings, for example, if I know that certain people will tend to go off on a particular topic, I might use the agenda and a timed agenda to manage it and to be able to say, okay, so we've got 10 minutes, let's talk about this. And if it's starting to get heated up, I'll say, okay, let's put a pin in that one because we really need to move on to the next item. I usually follow up afterwards. I don't just leave it. Changing the narratives and the things that we say. Remember the one from Robert Sternberg who says, hey, that's kind of what academia is. And if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. Well, we got to take that on. We got to take that on and say, no, that's not the narrative that we want. The narrative is that people treat each other with respect, and you guys have that here. What are the environmental practices? How is psychosocial safety considered in your institution? But I think that one of the number one things you can do is to build strong relationships before any of this stuff happens. And I'm not talking about, you don't have to be best friends with everybody, you don't have to socialize with anybody, but connecting and getting to know people, because when something happens, they will evaluate it within the context of the relationship they have with you. And if they don't have a relationship with you, or if their first contact or meaningful engagement with you is a hostile one or an upsetting one and whatnot, that challenges them. They will then more likely tend to make a personal attribution, like you're a problem, you're blah, blah. I mean, I rely on that in my work through the institution. And it's been my approach everywhere that I work is to get to know the people I work with and get them to know me, to know who I am. So if something happens and I spark at somebody about something, they'll stop for a minute and say, I know her. That's unusual. And they stay open and curious as opposed to, oh, she's, yeah. And building a sense of collective identity and supportive norms. And your organization has been doing that with concerted effort in the last few years. So your culture of respect, we watch out for each other, we need each other, and this is your logo again.